If the front passenger side upper control arm on your 2004 and newer F-150 has seen better days, well then, you might want to consider an affordable replacement from the gang here at OPR. Now the stock replacement from OPR will feature a burly steel build, complete with a brand new greasable ball joint and 2 new bushings on the frame side to basically completely overhaul the right side upper on your rig. Now your price point's going to land you somewhere in the $80 to $90 range, and the install itself will get a middle of the road 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter here. Take you a couple of hours to complete from start to finish. But if you hang out with me for a little bit, guys, we'll show you how it's done later in the video. So this is a rather simple product here, and again guys, it will be for those 2004 and newer 2 and 4-wheel drive F-150 owners who are in need of an affordable factory replacement control arm. And how do you know if you need to replace it? Well, could be a number of things, including noise coming from the front end, a rough ride or poor handling, or even the truck not aligning properly. Now the culprit more than likely is going to be the ball joint itself, but sometimes those rubber bushings here on the frame side tend to deteriorate over time and can lead to issues as well. Now if you've isolated the issue or the noise down to the upper control arm here, then you do have to replace the entire arm itself, as the ball joint up here is not replaceable on the factory arm, so therefore again, complete replacement is in order. And that's where the gang at OPR comes into play. They do make a wide variety of factory replacement parts out there, such as this of course, and a lot of it is pretty affordable overall. Keep in mind here guys, we are talking about the right side or passenger side in this video. We do also offer OPR's driver side as well. You can find it here on the site if you're looking to knock both out at the same time, and both are going to cost you roughly in that same $80 to $90 price point. Now from a construction standpoint, there isn't a ton to talk about here, but let's cover what we can. And again, your centerpiece is going to be the burly steel build, painted black to help you prevent any corrosion long term. Now on the knuckle side, you do have a brand new ball joint here, which is greasable by the way. It does have a little Zerk fitting here on the end. That's really nice to point out. It's going to prolong the life of the ball joint itself, and something that isn't included on the factory arm. Now on the frame or body side over here, 2 brand new bushings complete with sleeves, already pressed in and ready to go. So this whole arm is essentially ready to be installed without the need for anything else. Now I have seen a few questions about adding the OPR arm and possibly gaining some extra clearance in the event of a lift or leveling kit is installed. And what you have to keep in mind here guys is that this is essentially a factory replacement and not a performance-oriented part. So any extra clearance you do gain would simply be coincidental and not by design. However, if you are looking for something a little bit more performance-oriented, there are a number of upper control arms here on the site that you can check out as well. But now we want to show you just what it takes to get everything installed on your rig at home. And keep in mind guys, this is a pretty large year range. So some of those earlier trucks who have seen a lot of Northeast winters, you might be seeing a lot more rust. On the other hand, California or Florida-based trucks that are slightly newer, probably going to be a lot easier for you. Either way, here's that detailed walkthrough we promised you earlier, in addition to a quick tool breakdown.
The tools required for this install are an automotive floor jack, a 1/2-inch torque wrench, a 3/8 torque wrench, an 18mm ratcheting wrench, 21mm wrench, 18mm wrench, 10mm wrench, an 8mm wrench, a 27mm socket on a 1/2-inch drive, a 21mm socket 1/2-inch drive, 18mm socket 1/2-inch drive, an 18mm socket 3/8 drive, a 13mm 3/8 drive, 13mm 1/4-inch drive, 10mm 1/4-inch drive, 8mm 1/4-inch drive, a pry bar, a handheld vacuum pump, a dead blow hammer, a 1/2-inch impact gun, a 3/8 power ratchet, and a 1/4-inch impact gun.
Today we're working on the driver's side, but if you're working on the passenger side, the installation will be exactly the same process.
All right, so we're gonna get started by just getting our vehicle up in the air, supported with the front wheels off the ground, and remove our front wheels to get access to our suspension. Next, I'm going to unbolt my ABS line and my brake line off of my knuckle so that I can get ready to remove the entire knuckle assembly. After that, I'll pull my caliper and rotor. All right, with my 2 lines unbolted, I can now unbolt my caliper and hang that out of my way to remove my rotor. So you don't have to do this, but I like to remove my dust shield off from behind the rotor just so that when I remove this entire assembly, I don't damage my dust shield in the process. With everything out of my way, now I'm going to use a 5mm Allen socket to remove my ABS wheel speed sensor from the hub. Now using a 21mm socket, I'm going to disconnect the outer tie rod. Now I'm going to remove the cap for my axle nut. I'm going to do this with a flathead screwdriver and a hammer. Be very careful not to damage the cap as you will be reusing it later. All right, now with a 21mm socket, once again, I'm going to loosen up the nut for the lower ball joint, but I'm not going to remove it completely. Now I'm using an 18mm wrench to loosen up my upper ball joint. Don't be surprised if you see the stud start to spin. You can use an 8mm wrench to hold the bottom of the stud while you loosen up the nut. Now I'm just going to keep a little bit of pressure on the top of the upper control arm while I disconnect the upper ball joint. Now using a 13mm socket, I'm going to remove the axle nut out here on the outer hub, followed by the vacuum line on the back of the hub. All right, so now using a handheld vacuum actuated pump, I am going to apply 24 inches of vacuum to the large port on the back of the 4-wheel drive axle hub. This is done to disengage the axle splines on the 4-wheel drive IWE. All right, so since our truck already has a small lift kit installed, I'm going to use a floor jack to raise the lower control arm so that I can straighten out my axle angle so that I can more easily remove my outer hub assembly without damaging the IWE assembly. I want to make sure that I lift the lower control arm slowly so that I give the spring and the shock time to recoil. Make sure to be very careful so that you don't damage the diaphragm on the IWE and remove your entire hub. Now I'm going to use an 18mm socket to remove my sway bar end link. This is going to be done so that I can get my lower control arm to lower down far enough to remove my strut assembly. Once again with an 18mm, I'm going to remove my 2 lower strut nuts. This will allow me to lower my lower control arm down. All right, so our lower control arm isn't moving out of the way as nicely as I'd like it to, so I'm going to use a 21mm wrench and a 27mm socket on an impact gun to loosen up the bolts just enough to get my lower control arm to swing down freely. Now this is going to mess up your alignment angle, but that really isn't going to matter, as the upper control arm is also going to mess up your alignment angle, and you're going to need an alignment when you're finished anyway. All right, as I said before, our truck already has a small lift kit installed onto it. You can see that there's a small spacer in here. Usually there would be 3 studs sticking up out of the top with an 18mm nut. I'm going to be using an 8mm Allen socket to get our 3 bolts out, but you would use an 18mm wrench at home. With our upper strut hardware removed, you can remove the entire strut assembly to get access to your upper control arm bolts. Now we finally have everything out of the way, we can start pulling our upper control arm out. We're going to use a 21mm wrench and an 18mm socket with a ratchet to remove the 2 upper bolts. Now we can install our new upper control arm. I'm just going to snug them so that I can torque them. Now that I have the upper control arm installed with the bolts, I can torque them to 122 foot-pounds. With our new upper control arm installed, now we can start putting our vehicle back together. First step is going to be to put the strut assembly back in the vehicle. Now that we've got these tight, we're going to lift our lower control arm back into place, get our nuts started on our struts to get everything re-situated, and then we're going to start putting our knuckle assembly back in. And now we can throw the nuts back on for the bottom of the strut assembly. Once again, with a 27mm socket and 21mm wrench, we're going to snug up the bolts for the lower control arm. And now we can tighten up the nut for the sway bar end link on the lower control arm. Now, once again, with 24 inches of vacuum applied to my handheld vacuum pump connected to my IWE actuator, I'm going to very carefully reinstall the knuckle assembly, simultaneously lining up my lower ball joint with the axle itself. Once I have my lower ball joint through the bottom, get the nuts started to hold everything in place while I line the axle up finally with the hub. Now that I have the axle fully through the IWE hub, I'm just going to lightly tighten it up before I torque it down later. And now I can release my vacuum. A good way to check that you've done it properly is that when you disengage the vacuum, the axle does not spin freely. With the help of a pry bar, I'm going to push down on my upper control arm until I can see the threads coming out of the upper tie rod end or upper ball joint nut hole, and then I'm going to get the nut started by hand. Now I'm going to use a 21mm ratcheting wrench to tighten down my upper ball joint nut. Once again, not uncommon for this to spin, just get another wrench to hold this in place. And now you can reconnect your outer tie rod end. Now that your entire hub assembly is in place and your axle is securely through the IWE, you can tighten up your lower ball joint. Now we can reconnect our vacuum ports and reinstall our ABS line. Next, we can reinstall our previously removed dust shield before we reinstall our caliper and rotor. Now we can reinstall our caliper before we reconnect our lines to our knuckle. Now I'm going to snug up my caliper bolts with a 21mm socket before I torque them to 184 foot-pounds. Finally, we can reinstall our ABS line bolts and our brake line bolts. Before reinstalling your dust cap, make sure to torque your axle nut to 35 foot-pounds. I use a pry bar in between the lug studs and then put my torque wrench on and click it to 35. Reinstall your dust cap and you're ready to go. Once you've got your dust cap reinstalled and everything torqued to spec, throw your wheel on, take it up to an alignment shop and get a solid alignment done.
That'll do it for my install of the OPR front upper control arm and ball joint assembly. And for all things F-150, keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.